Shot and scalped. The mysterious survival of DeRudio at Little Bighorn. Imagine this. You're lying hidden in the dirt, convinced you've been left for dead. You're an Italian nobleman, a former revolutionary, and now an officer in the U.S. 7th Cavalry. For 36 hours you're trapped in a nightmare, surrounded by thousands of victorious Lakota and Cheyenne warriors. You witness horrors that defy words, survive on nothing but sheer luck and cunning, and come out the other side with a story so unbelievable that most people refuse to believe it. This is the story of Lieutenant Charles DeRudio and his impossible survival at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. On June 25, 1876, the valley of the Little Bighorn River was pure chaos. Major Marcus Reno's battalion, a part of Lieutenant Colonel George Custer's 7th Cavalry, was in a full-blown, panicked retreat. They'd charged a massive Native American village thinking it would be an easy fight, but they were met with an overwhelming force. As troopers desperately scrambled back across the river, many were shot right out of their saddles, their bodies left behind. And in that bloody confusion, one man's horse was shot out from under him. He was stranded, alone, and deep inside enemy territory. That man was Charles DeRudio, and his private war for survival was just getting started. Charles Camillo DeRudio was not your typical cavalry officer. Seriously, his backstory sounds more like a movie plot than a real life. Born into Italian aristocracy, he'd already been a revolutionary, a would-be assassin of France's Napoleon III, and an escaped prisoner from the infamous Devil's Island. This wild path somehow led him to America, where he served in the Civil War and eventually got a commission in the 7th Cavalry in 1869. His fancy past and aristocratic vibe didn't exactly make him popular. He was even disliked by Custer himself, who thought he wasn't up to snuff. The influential Captain Frederick Benteen gave him the charming nickname Count No Account, making fun of his noble background and his habit of telling what many thought were tall tales. But here's the twist. Custer's dislike for DeRudio actually saved his life. Custer reassigned him from Company E to Company A, under Major Reno's command. The officer who took his original spot in Company E, Algernon Smith, would die with Custer on Last Stand Hill. When the battle kicked off, Reno's battalion charged the southern end of the huge Lakota and Cheyenne camp. For a moment, they thundered across the plains with confidence, but that feeling quickly turned to dread. Warriors poured out of the village in shocking numbers, flanking the soldiers and raining down a devastating fire. The attack crumbled. Reno saw it was a trap and ordered his men to dismount and form a skirmish line in the trees by the river. But the position couldn't be held. Outnumbered and overwhelmed, Reno ordered a chaotic retreat back across the river. It was every man for himself. And in that mad dash, Lieutenant DeRudio's horse was hit, and he was left all alone, with hundreds of warriors just yards away. With bullets zinging past his head, DeRudio dove into a thicket of dense brush. He wasn't completely alone, though. In the chaos, he ran into Fred Gerard, the civilian interpreter, a scout named William Jackson, and Private Thomas O'Neill. For a second, they were a small band of survivors. But their ordeal was just starting. The next 36 hours would be a trip straight into hell. From his hiding spot, DeRudio was forced to watch the gruesome aftermath of the retreat. He later described seeing Lakota women moving across the battlefield, performing what he called a diabolical war dance around a wounded, dying soldier before scalping and mutilating him. "I will not attempt to describe to you my feelings at witnessing the disgusting performance," he later wrote. The terror was constant, suffocating. At one point, warriors who knew some soldiers were hiding in the timber set the whole area on fire to flush them out. DeRudio said the crackling flames moved incredibly fast, forcing him to crawl on his belly to escape being burned alive. The smoke and heat were choking, but he managed to find a new hiding spot in a creek bed, rejoining O'Neill and the others. They huddled together, just listening. They could hear the voices of warriors passing by, sometimes just feet from where they lay. They had no food and no water for a day and a half. Hope would flicker and then die as they waited for the darkness that offered their only chance of escape. Every snapping twig, every distant shout could have been a death sentence. As the sun finally went down on June 26th, the sounds of battle were long gone, replaced by a strange, eerie quiet. The small group decided it was now or never. Under the cover of total darkness, they slipped out of the timber and began their desperate journey. The plan was to follow the river, get across it, and hopefully find the rest of the command on the bluffs on the other side. Their progress was painfully slow. As they crept along, they stumbled right into a group of 8 enemy horsemen. The 2 men in their party who still had horses, Gerard and Jackson, took off. DeRudio and O'Neill dove back into the brush, hearts pounding, sure they'd been seen. DeRudio knelt, his revolver cocked, ready to go down fighting. But incredibly, the warriors just kept going and disappeared into the night. They pushed on, only to find their path blocked. The river crossings were heavily guarded. They had to hide again, this time just yards from the riverbank, so close they could hear the guards talking. The hours crawled by. Finally, in the dim light of early morning on June 27th, they heard a large group of horses crossing the river. They stayed hidden, afraid it was another war party. But as the sun came up, they saw them. Blue uniforms. It was General Terry's relief column. Using their last bit of strength, DeRudio and O'Neill scrambled toward the soldiers on the bluffs. DeRudio yelled out, "It's Lieutenant DeRudio and Private O'Neill, don't fire!" A cheer went up from the exhausted defenders on what became known as Reno Hill. Against all odds, after 36 hours trapped behind enemy lines, the Italian count and the Irish private were safe. DeRudio's incredible survival story went public almost immediately. An account, packed with dramatic details, was published in the New York Herald under the headline, "A Thrilling Tale." But the ink was barely dry before the controversy started. DeRudio himself would later claim he didn't actually write the piece, but just gave the details to another officer who, he said, spiced it up for sensationalism. This was just the beginning of the doubt that would follow DeRudio. His reputation was already a bit shaky. Captain Benteen, the man who called him Count No Account, had a low opinion of his skills and thought he was just a boastful storyteller. After DeRudio came out of the woods, Benteen sarcastically remarked that he had a thrilling romantic story made out already. Embellished, you bet. Some criticized DeRudio for hiding, while the rest of Reno and Benteen's men were fighting for their lives on the bluffs. He also claimed he was the only officer to carry a saber into the battle, a claim that was met with eye rolls and later proven false. To many of the tough, no-nonsense officers of the 7th, he was just an outsider, a dramatic aristocrat whose story seemed a little too perfect, a little too much like a movie. Despite all that, he did testify at the Reno Court of Inquiry in 1879, a hearing Major Reno himself had requested to clear his name of cowardice. While some officers were quietly trying to protect Reno's reputation, DeRudio's testimony gave a blunt account of the chaos in the valley. The Battle of the Little Bighorn is filled with these incredible, lesser-known stories of survival, controversy, and courage. If you find these hidden corners of history as fascinating as we do, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss what's next. And let us know in the comments. What's your take on DeRudio? Was he a hero, just a lucky guy, or a master storyteller who knew how to spin a good yarn? Charles DeRudio's life didn't end at the Little Bighorn. He kept serving in the U.S. Army for another 2 decades, even fighting in the Nez Perce War, and eventually retired as a major in 1896. He spent his final years in Los Angeles, a world away from those bloody riverbanks. So what do we make of him? Was he the hero from the newspaper story, a man who stared death in the face and won? Or was he Count No Account, an officer who padded his own legend? The real story is probably somewhere in the messy middle. His account, whether it was embellished or not, remains one of the most vivid and terrifying perspectives from inside the chaos of Custer's last stand. And whether he was brave, lucky, or just a great storyteller, The mysterious survival of Charles DeRudio is an unforgettable part of the legend of the American West.